I raised my daughter for 15 full years before uncovering my wife's devastating secret affair, a betrayal that ended up proving I was never my little girl's biological father. Even though 4 years have passed, I realize after this most recent Memorial Day that I'm still not over it, and I truly need guidance. I've been lurking on these subreddits for a long time, silently hoping that by reading other people's stories, I might find someone else who went through something comparable. I figured I'd learn from how they handled it, but evidently my circumstances are one of a kind. So here goes. Let me say this up front, I couldn't care less if you think this story is made up, and I don't care if you're going to criticize me harshly after I pour my heart out. It's all in the past. I convinced myself I was fine, that I'd moved on, but after last weekend it slammed back into me, the fury surged to the surface, and now that I'm home with my fiancé, that anger toward my ex remains stubbornly lodged in my soul. I spent years in anger management for all that happened, her wrongdoing and the shattered world that followed, and I honestly believed I had come to terms with it. I'm 39 years old now, and when this all began, I was just 18. I was 18 when I met my ex, Marisol. At the time, I had been living the life of a gangbanger affiliated with the Latin Kings, and I'd been part of that dangerous path since I was 13. Trouble was my constant companion. Marisol, on the other hand, was a devoted churchgoer. My grandmother used to drag me along to Sunday Mass, and that's where I first laid eyes on Marisol. To me, it was an overwhelming infatuation at first sight. I asked my cousin, a friend of hers, to introduce us, but he refused because he worried I would soil her innocence and derail her life. Have you ever encountered someone who instantly made you want to straighten up and transform yourself just so you could walk the righteous path at their side? That was exactly how I felt for her. Once I discovered that she attended church services practically every day of the week, I would wait for her on the front steps just to strike up conversation. I walked her to and from church whenever I could. She made me believe that I wasn't a worthless individual, that I had value. One thing led to another, and soon we were dating, something that lasted about a year and a half. During that period, I did everything in my power to distance myself from gang life. I earned my GED, became a familiar face at church, and started laying out ambitious plans for my future. But then I got sucked right back in, inadvertently. I ran into someone at a store, someone with whom I had a long history of conflict. He started talking trash, and I honestly tried my best to tune it out. I calmly walked away, just letting him run his mouth. Then he stabbed me in the shoulder blade, and in that instant, I snapped. I completely lost my composure and beat the living daylights out of him. I ended up arrested, and it felt like all the effort I'd invested in bettering myself went down the drain. Marisol was furious with me. My grandmother started listing off all my old mistakes, shaking her head in disappointment. My cousin basically said, "I told you so," that I wasn't going to change. But here's what saved me, my public defender recognized I was making strides to improve my life, and by some miracle, he managed to secure my release after just a month in lockup. Marisol, even though she was seething with anger, still came to visit me pretty much every single day of that month. A month after I was released, Marisol and I discovered I was going to be a father. That was a massive wake-up call. I vowed right then that my child would never have a father behind bars or 6 feet under. We both talked it out at length. I enrolled in a trade school to train as a mechanic, and I pushed myself incredibly hard to create a stable life for our growing family. When our daughter Luna was born, it ended up being one of the most frightening days of my life. Marisol wouldn't stop bleeding, went into a state of shock, and ultimately needed a double hysterectomy. She spent weeks in the hospital, months, actually, and in that time, baby Luna became the center of my universe. I dedicated myself to giving her the brightest future possible, vowing that she would have better opportunities than any of us ever had. When Marisol was finally discharged from the hospital, I promised her that our daughter would have the kind of life we could only have dreamed about when we were younger. I spent years working my fingers to the bone to fulfill that promise. I saved my money, relocated us to the suburbs, and became a homeowner. I even led Luna's Girl Scout troop, which still sounds surreal to me. I placed her in private school, taught her how to defend herself, and put all my energy into being the perfect father and husband. Growing up, I had no positive male role models, so I wasn't entirely sure what a healthy marriage looked like. I confess, I took inspiration from TV dads, observing the way they behaved as husbands and fathers, then mimicking that. Over time, my efforts paid off. I managed to open my own garage, and ironically my cousin became a pastor. My grandmother, bless her, still found ways to aggravate me. My marriage felt indestructible, and I maintained a strong physique, a leftover from my prison fitness days. Luna, however, changed drastically once she hit 13. Overnight, it seemed like she couldn't stand me anymore. She refused to let me hug her, rolled her eyes whenever I said, "I love you," and acted like I didn't exist if I asked about her day at school. That broke my heart deeply. When I discussed it with Marisol, she told me that Luna was just going through that rebellious teenage period. She assured me to simply let it ride, and she'd come back around eventually. For 2 whole years, it felt like that, constant tension and distance. So when her quinceanera arrived, I really wanted to pull out all the stops to make it special. I spoiled her, gave her everything I could afford, and yet she still treated me with such contempt. At one point, the old version of me came dangerously close to erupting. I wanted to put her in her place, but instead I sought out my cousin for counseling. I opened up to him about my stress and doubts regarding fatherhood. He told me to keep calm, prayed for me, and reminded me to keep my faith. I had planned a slideshow for our father-daughter dance, wanting to include lots of pictures we'd taken together. But as I searched, I realized I didn't have any recent ones. She had refused to pose with me for the last couple of years. The most current photos of us smiling side by side were from her 13th birthday. They existed only on my daughter's damaged tablet. Determined to get those pictures, I took her shattered tablet to a repair shop and told the technician that I didn't care about the cost. I just needed it fixed so I could retrieve those memories. The repair cost $300, which I gladly paid. I knew her passcode but had never invaded her privacy before. I only wanted those photos of us. When I unlocked the tablet, I found the old pictures, and for a moment, I felt indescribable joy. Finally, glimpses of us smiling together. Then notifications for instant messages popped up, and my curiosity got the better of me. There were chats between Luna and my wife. Most of it revolved around how she despised the idea of me dancing with her, which hurt, but I brushed it off as normal teenage stubbornness. Then I saw a message that obliterated my world. Luna asked her mother why she had to do the father-daughter dance with me when I wasn't even her real father. In that moment, it felt like my heart stopped, my head spun, my mouth turned parched, and I had to sit down because my legs wobbled. Marisol responded that I had raised Luna, loved her, and thus was her father in every sense of the word. But Luna countered that my cousin was her real dad, and she couldn't wait until her 18th birthday to unveil the truth so she could go live with him. She wrote she was grateful that I wasn't actually her father, calling me worthless. Marisol's replies were loaded with foul language, scolding Luna, telling her it was a mistake for my cousin to divulge the truth 2 years earlier. The more I read, the more my rage escalated. My wife had lied to me for 15 long years. My own cousin, someone I confided in when I was anxious about being a good dad, was the one who had gotten her pregnant. Yet both of them had let me raise his daughter without a hint of remorse. My emotional state felt like a boiling pot about to blow its lid, a volatile mix of anger, sadness, and a strange inclination to vanish or self-destruct. Fearing I might do something catastrophically stupid, I concocted a story for Marisol. I told her I needed to focus on my job to pay for the quince. Instead, I drove to Manhattan to seek out the same public defender who had represented me all those years ago. By then, he wasn't a newbie, he had a swanky law firm in Midtown East. Shockingly, he remembered me, explaining that I had been his first ever case. We sat down together, and I laid it all out, from A to Z. I handed him the tablet, and when he turned it on, it continued to receive fresh messages, from Luna to my cousin, her so-called real father. My cousin was telling her to give me a chance because I had always been around for her. Luna retorted that he was there for her too, and that they shared so many similarities. She kept calling him Papi, and he would respond by calling her his little girl. When my attorney finished reading, he asked me point blank what I planned to do. My reply was unfiltered. I wanted to scorch the earth, leave nothing but embers behind. He asked multiple times if that was really my final decision, and I nodded every time. I also emphasized we had less than 2 weeks until the quince, so I needed swift action. We spent a grueling 12 hours mapping out the approach, and I followed his directions meticulously. I quietly listed my business for sale, informed the private school that I would not be renewing Luna's enrollment for the upcoming year, closed out the college fund and the savings accounts I had set up for her, and prepared to list my house on the market. Nobody suspected a thing. I adhered strictly to my attorney's plan, except for one major deviation on the night of the quinceanera. The quinceanera day proceeded flawlessly. The entire extended family showed up. Luna smiled, danced, and seemed genuinely overjoyed. Marisol kept asking me if I was doing okay, and I lied, telling her I was simply overwhelmed. It broke my heart to lie to her. In the 15 or so years we'd shared, I had never lied to her once. For 2 weeks, every time we kissed, held each other, or made love, I had to battle the urge to scream and rage at her. I hated how she had knowingly allowed me to raise her lover's child. It was even more monstrous to think that the other man was my cousin, who I viewed as a brother, godfather to my child, and even the best man when we had eloped. The fury was excruciating to contain. Finally, when it was time for the traditional father-daughter dance, I escorted Luna to the center of the room. She looked completely irritated but followed me anyway. The music started, and she actually smiled at me, and that crushed my soul. For years, I prayed for that beaming grin, and here it was, but now it felt hollow. As we danced, the slideshow displayed a montage of photos capturing father-daughter moments. But at the end of that loop, it transitioned into the screenshots, her text conversations with her mother and her actual father. The reaction was instant and devastating. Marisol looked paler than a ghost, Luna stared at the giant screen in wide-eyed horror, and my cousin's face filled with a terror I hadn't seen before. Marisol rushed toward me, panicked and trembling, insisting she could explain. I told her I'd filed for divorce and that she could explain it all in court. She clutched my arm, pleading for me to listen, but I yanked myself free and turned to Luna. I made it crystal clear that I worked tirelessly to give her everything a child could dream of, but that she'd proven herself unworthy of it. I stormed out, telling my cousin that every time I laid eyes on him in the future, I'd knock him to the floor. And then I did exactly that. I punched him so hard he hit the ground. In the aftermath, the shockwaves were severe. Marisol and Luna ended up staying at my grandmother's apartment. Her side of the family was appalled and disgusted by Marisol's betrayal, and they distanced themselves from her. Even Marisol's father, who never liked me, shockingly apologized for her conduct. This man had despised me ever since I was a teenager tangled up in gangs, never acknowledging how I changed my life, yet now he confessed that he had been wrong about me. Meanwhile, my grandmother had the gall to lecture me about the biblical story of Abraham, referencing how he returned from war after 3 years only to discover his wife had a 1-year-old child, and Abraham still raised that child as his own. She insisted I should do the same. I told her to get out of my face. A few days later, Marisol arrived at my door in floods of tears, insisting it was a momentary mistake back when I was incarcerated. She claimed she was furious at me that day, and my cousin was there consoling her, and it spiraled into a single instance of sexual betrayal. She insisted she had remained faithful from that point forward. She even volunteered to prove it with a lie detector test. But I demanded to know when she found out Luna wasn't mine. She started bawling even harder. The haunted, guilty look in her eyes told me she had known from day one. I told her to leave. She begged for counseling, calling me dramatic for not getting over the past. She argued that since it happened so long ago, we should salvage the family, that I'm Luna's dad in the ways that count. She pushed me too far, and I lost my temper. I began to shout, "Get over it," at the top of my lungs, repeated it a dozen times, seized her, and pushed her out the door in a fit of rage. I resorted to insults, calling her a deceitful liar, and told her I never wanted to see her again. And I informed her that the life I had built was no longer hers. Time passed, maybe a couple of weeks. She blew up my phone with calls, but Luna never once attempted to contact me. Marisol was astonished when she learned I'd already sold my business, and even more astonished that I'd arranged an open house for prospective buyers of our home. She showed up screaming that this was also her house, terrifying the visitors, insisting that I was sick and needed therapy. She said I had no right to sell the place that held so many memories of raising our child. I told her the house was built on lies, that I'd unknowingly raised a child that belonged to someone else, and that when I sold it, I would give her half, but she needed to leave right away or I would call the police. I was bluffing, of course. Had she played the victim card, I could have been arrested. But she didn't. She just stormed off, tears in her eyes. Soon after, my cousin attempted to talk to me. I responded by knocking him unconscious, dragging him outside, and slamming the door. I declined mediation. Marisol demanded reconciliation, but there was no chance. I wanted a divorce, plain and simple, and I wanted it expedited. By then, I'd read countless horror stories about the family court system, but my personal experience at the Nassau County Courthouse was surprisingly fair thanks to a female judge who remained neutral. We hardly spoke to each other. In court, Marisol's lawyer tried to spotlight my gang past to argue that maybe I was a bad husband or father, but my attorney made quick work of that, and the judge admonished her lawyer for shaming someone who had worked hard to turn his life around. Then came the bombshell. My attorney presented all the evidence, the text messages, the confession that everyone knew I wasn't Luna's father, and offered a lump sum alimony payment once my house and business sold. Marisol was in shock, pleading for me to reconsider the divorce, but when she realized I wouldn't bend, she signed off. The genuine surprise was child support, or rather the lack thereof. My lawyer showed that not only did Luna know I wasn't her dad, but she also wrote that she was eager to be free of me, to embrace her real dad. We put forth a motion to have me removed from the birth certificate, removing my last name from hers, and eliminating any child support liability. The judge spent a long time quietly reading the texts. She eventually ruled that yes, I was not responsible for the child and could be removed from the birth certificate. Marisol screamed at me in that courtroom, begging me to reconsider, insisting I was Luna's father in every way that mattered because I had raised her. And as pitiful as this may sound, if Luna had shown any genuine regret, if she hadn't said those cruel things, I might have chosen differently. There were times when I was tempted to reevaluate. But then I'd read those messages again, where she thanked God I wasn't her dad because I was apparently a gangster. That stung like a knife. I held firm. The judge ruled in my favor, and my lawyer also filed a petition to pursue my cousin for retroactive child support, given he had knowingly allowed me to bear all the financial burdens for his daughter, private schooling, horseback lessons, dance classes, all the extracurriculars I'd covered over the years. This was fraud, my attorney explained, and it stuck. The judge allowed it to proceed. I didn't even glance at Marisol as I left the courtroom. I had no interest in hearing her lament that she was only unfaithful one time. I was immune to her tears. In the weeks following, Marisol reached out, furious that Luna's private school tuition and other activities had been cut off. I told her to go collect from her real baby daddy and hung up. Then Luna called me for the first time since this blew up. She was sobbing that she was stuck going to a public school, forced to move back to our old, rough neighborhood. She said it was scary and claimed she wanted to be a family again. My anger exploded at that. I told her to run to her true father, the man she so badly wanted. I told her that I'd read every line of her vile messages. She was so relieved that someone like me wasn't her biological father, as if I was still stuck in that gang mentality from my teenage years, rather than being the man I'd strived to become for her sake. I hung up the phone. The rage inside me became corrosive, and I spiraled into dark thoughts, ending my own life, ending my cousin's existence. But revenge came through the legal system. I won a $500,000 settlement, courtesy of my cousin, which ironically came from the church funds he'd managed. I left New York behind. I moved to Idaho, a random choice based on its distance and unpredictability. I opened a new auto shop, bought a new home, and spent 2 years grappling with profound trust issues. I found a new therapist, attended anger management, and unleashed my pent-up frustrations in rage rooms. It wasn't until I returned to church that something shifted in my spirit. That is where I eventually met my fiancée, Jocelyn. She was 30 at the time. We clicked instantly, and I told her everything, the good, the bad, and the terrifyingly ugly. I warned her that I came with baggage and trust issues, and she accepted that. A year later, she told me she was pregnant. She insisted that I get a DNA test for peace of mind. It was so uplifting to feel that excitement of fatherhood again. When my son was born, I was elated. Time passed, and I found myself wanting to share the news with my grandmother. We hadn't spoken in years. She burst into tears, and after I told her about my newborn son, she guilt-tripped me into visiting New York so she could meet her great-grandchild, pointing out that she was 90 and might not have much time left. I agreed. We flew to New York and drove to Bushwick. The neighborhood grapevine works fast. The moment one person spots you, everyone knows you're back. My grandmother was overjoyed to meet my son and be introduced to Jocelyn. She made some offhand comment in Spanish about Jocelyn's lighter complexion, and I just brushed it off. I wanted to spend a carefree week in the city, playing tourist with Jocelyn since she had never been to the Big Apple. But, as always, nothing goes as planned. First, my ex hollered my name from the street downstairs. When I peered out the window, I was shocked to see how much weight she had put on. My grandmother told me in Spanish I should talk to her, and Jocelyn agreed. I went downstairs, and we just stood there, paralyzed with awkwardness. That old fury began to bubble. Marisol commented that I looked good. She also mentioned that she's a grandmother now. Luna had evidently found a decent man and gotten pregnant at 18. The baby's father had enlisted in the Marines to provide for them, but he wanted nothing to do with Luna emotionally. My cousin had left the ministry and was now working as a teller at Banco Popular around the corner. Marisol told me Luna named the baby after me. That infuriated me. She then tried to stall me, urging me to wait because Luna was on her way over. I ignored her, returning to my grandmother's apartment. Jocelyn sensed something was wrong without me uttering a word, and we prepared to leave. On our way out, Marisol stood there looking devastated, like Jocelyn was some intruder who'd broken up her marriage. Jocelyn politely introduced our son, pointedly emphasizing that he was biologically mine. It cut deep. Marisol pleaded with me not to leave, insisting Luna was remorseful, but I was too upset to listen. I sped away in the rental car. Then I saw my cousin at a fruit stand at a red light. Something inside me snapped. I jumped out of the car, charged him, and unleashed a brutal beating. Jocelyn screamed at me to stop, and when I finally did, I spat on him and returned to the car. Now we're back home. I'm settling into daily life, focusing on being a good father to my son and a caring partner to Jocelyn. But returning to that old neighborhood reopened wounds, and I'm once again fighting the wave of resentment. Luna texted me, including a photo of her baby, apologizing. But I'm torn. Is she sorry for how she treated me, or is she just upset that her ideal version of a father turned out to be a deadbeat who doesn't want her? I'm stuck in uncertainty, terrified of letting my guard down. People keep advising me to allow her back into my life, but my mind replays all those texts, the hidden truths, the layers of deceit. My usual coping methods are failing me, and I seriously need help. This is me laying it all out there, for better or for worse. And again, if you think this is fake, I truly don't care, your help is still appreciated. Update 1, I'm waiting for the mods to greenlight this. It's been a while since I posted, and Father's Day just passed. Luna tried calling me multiple times, and I stared at the phone, debating whether to pick up. But my mind just kept circling back to those old messages, to the hurtful words she wrote to her mother, her real father, and her friends. So I ignored her calls. Eventually, I listened to her voicemail. She sounded bright, almost a little too cheerful, apologizing briefly for her behavior, yet something about it didn't strike me as fully genuine. Maybe she was just glossing over it. She started talking about her baby, her fiancé, then asked me to call. A simple request, and it infuriated me. My grandmother and Jocelyn keep saying I should give her a chance. But when I asked my grandmother point blank if Luna or Marisol had asked about me at all in the 4 years since I left, she admitted Marisol asked about me constantly, but Luna never did. My mind jumped to the conclusion that maybe Luna wants me in her life now for financial support, maybe for her own child. That rage flared. Marisol has been blowing up my phone too, so I'm honestly considering changing my number. I spent most of Father's Day in the gym, hammering away at a punching bag until I was exhausted, and now I'm heading to an anger management group session. If this gets published, I'd love the community's take. Meanwhile, I'm trying to untangle this mess by myself. Update 2, I sent a succinct email to Luna asking, "What do you want?" I didn't anticipate a multi-paragraph reply. She started by issuing a sincere, extensive apology for her treatment of me. She explained that when she first learned I wasn't her biological father, she was a bubbling cauldron of fury and confusion. She confronted her mother, who broke down crying, insisting she keep it hidden from me. Luna felt unmoored. She sought out my cousin and grew closer to him. He told her disturbing stories about my violent past, revealing all the skeletons in my closet that I had shielded her from. It fed her resentment. She claims that the more she hung out with him, the more she withdrew from me. She occasionally felt pangs of guilt, but my cousin would reinforce her anger. On the day of her quince, while we danced, she realized how foolish she was being, how much I really loved her, only for her horrific texts to flash on the screen. When everything crumbled afterward, Marisol's side of the family advised Luna not to contact me, giving me space to cool off. She obeyed, and in that time, she helplessly watched our family disintegrate, feeling powerless. She confessed that she thought I'd forgive her because I had always been the bedrock she relied on, but when she discovered I had legally removed myself from her life, she panicked. She says she called me begging, and I cursed her out. She was in anguish for days. She pleaded for my cousin's help, but he brushed her off, telling her she was just a mistake. Her mother shut down, barely ate, and sank into her own misery, blaming Luna for losing the love of her life. Her mother's father, my ex-father-in-law, had to step in, telling Marisol that it was her unfaithful actions that cost her a loving husband, not Luna. Luna felt stuck in a home where her mother spoke to her only to hurl accusations, so she started spending more time away. That's when she met the father of her child, a teen working at the corner bodega. They were both lonely and ended up pregnant. Her mother finally emerged from her shell to support her through medical appointments, and ironically that pregnancy brought them closer. Luna graduated high school right before giving birth. Her boyfriend joined the Marines to provide for the baby, and he had no issue naming his son after me, because he never had a father figure in his own life and didn't want a generational cycle of absent dads. When Luna heard I was in town, she tried to get to me as fast as possible but ended up with a speeding ticket. Unfortunately, she arrived too late to see me, which caused her to cry. Her mother gave her my phone number, and she was about to call me immediately, but rumor spread in the neighborhood that I'd beaten my cousin to a pulp. She decided to hold off. Luna was happy to hear I'd moved on, had a fiancé and a baby boy, but her mother became more depressed, realizing I truly wasn't returning to her. Luna claims to be genuinely remorseful. She's aware she mishandled everything and let her anger be manipulated by my cousin. Reading her email was heartbreaking, and I ended up calling Marisol. She admitted that she had indeed isolated herself, cursing Luna out regularly, and even held Luna responsible for my leaving. At first, I started yelling at her, but reined myself in when I heard her sobbing. I told her I'd moved on, and she should do the same. She refused, saying I'd always be her husband in her heart, which made me feel a bit sorry for her. Then I arranged for my grandmother to speak to my cousin so I could confront him over the phone. The instant he heard my voice, he pleaded for my forgiveness. I asked why he hadn't stepped up as a dad to Luna and why he poisoned her perspective of me, and he confessed it was jealousy. He'd loved Marisol all along, envied what I had, my family, my stable life. That night with Marisol, he manipulated her while she was furious about my arrest, and it only lasted a moment, but it was enough to conceive a child. She shoved him off, but it was too late. When Luna turned 13, his envy resurfaced, and he decided to systematically tarnish everything I'd built. He apologized profusely, but I told him that in the afterlife, I would be there to torment him forever, then hung up. Jocelyn reassured me that we would get through all this. Afterward, Luna and I started emailing back and forth. Then on the 4th of July, we had our first phone conversation in years. She spent the entire call crying, asking for forgiveness, apologizing non-stop. I spoke briefly to her boyfriend, who politely asked for my blessing to marry her, which was oddly charming. My wedding to Jocelyn is next month, and she wants me to invite Luna. Meanwhile, Luna has asked me to walk her down the aisle at her own wedding in November. My future father-in-law gave me a heartfelt pep talk, confessing he couldn't possibly imagine what I'd gone through but respected the path I took, because that path led me to rescue his daughter from an abusive relationship. It touched me. He told me I must let go of the bitterness, though never forget the lessons it taught me. He's right. So we decided to invite Luna to our wedding, even offered to cover her plane tickets. Her fiancé offered to work off the debt in my garage when he arrives, which made me chuckle. Concerning giving her away at her wedding, I'm still not certain. One step at a time, starting with my own wedding. Thank you again to the wonderful folks who reached out, even those who messaged me privately. Almost nobody was mean-spirited, and your support has been priceless. I'll let you know how things go. Update 3, a lot has happened in a short time span, so I want to extend my gratitude to everyone, this forum, the supportive private messages, and even those who criticized me. It may be easy to say, I would do it differently, but until you experience something of this magnitude, you truly don't know. With the wedding approaching, I was constantly on edge. Jocelyn looked happier than I'd ever seen her. My soon-to-be in-laws were flipping out, trying to accommodate the massive crowd of relatives and local friends. Meanwhile, I was a couple of hours away in Boise, anxiously waiting at the airport for Luna's arrival. In the days leading up to the trip, we'd talked often, she mostly cried, apologizing, and I listened more than I spoke. When their plane landed, I felt an enormous knot in my stomach. I was afraid I might lose my temper the second I laid eyes on Luna. Instead, the moment she recognized me in the arrivals hall, she sprinted over and latched onto me, crying like a young child. It was so reminiscent of how she used to cling to me at 7 years old. She wouldn't let go. She just kept sobbing, I'm sorry, again and again, begging me to forgive her, and I couldn't pry her off. We spent nearly 15 minutes frozen there, with countless onlookers. It took her fiancé's help to calm her down. She seemed terrified that if she released me, I'd evaporate. Her fiancé introduced himself. Then they introduced me to my grandson. I'll be honest, I wept. I cradled this baby, and my heart softened. Luna looked so much like Marisol did at 19, and it made me briefly wonder how my ex was doing now. On the drive to my place, we chatted about her fiancé's Marine boot camp, their future plans, and general catching up. By the time we got home, Jocelyn and her family had prepared an immense feast. Over the months, Jocelyn had actually learned to cook many Latin dishes, and now she went all out. Luna bonded with Jocelyn, who welcomed her with open arms. Every so often, Luna would pause and hurry back to me, giving me another hug. Meanwhile, I tried to entertain both my son and my grandson. Jocelyn's family introduced themselves in a flurry of excitement. Luna seemed to float between them and me, occasionally flashing the biggest smile. It was heartwarming. I stepped outside for fresh air, and Luna's fiancé, Roberto, was gazing in awe at the farmland and bison roving around. I wanted to give him the typical fatherly intimidation speech, but it didn't feel right. Instead, I asked him if he liked the open view. Growing up in a concrete jungle, wide open spaces can be mesmerizing. We small-talked, and then he confessed how remorseful Luna was, and how she still regrets pushing me away every single day. He said not a day goes by that she doesn't mention me. It was a powerful statement and kept echoing in my mind. Roberto is only 19, but he carries himself like someone much older, like he's lived a tougher life that forced him to mature faster. I respect that. The next day, I had to visit my auto shop for a while. Luna insisted on tagging along with her baby, and Roberto suggested she relax, but she looked panicked at the idea of me leaving her sight. I promised we'd only work a half day so I could spend the rest of it with her. Only then did she calm down. I was taken aback by how fragile her nerves were. She had developed severe anxiety, and Roberto confided that she struggled with nightmares, fear of abandonment, and clinginess. She was consistently worried he'd leave her too, and he constantly reassured her that wouldn't happen. My heart broke, realizing I played a part in the trauma. Still, Roberto didn't blame me. He said he fully understood my reasons. By the way, he's a terrible mechanic, totally clueless under the hood, but I put him to work on simpler tasks like cleaning up. After half a day, we returned home, and Luna practically sprinted over, looking distressed until she saw I was really back. Jocelyn quietly pulled me aside, whispering that Luna is scared of me disappearing again. She said Luna needs her father to reaffirm that everything's okay. I made it my mission over the next few days to reconnect with her. I took her to see my in-laws' ranch, showed her the bison, the elk, took her on short hikes. 2 days before my wedding, I finally apologized for walking away the way I did, for how I'd handled things, and for the harsh decisions I made. She cried, insisting I had nothing to apologize for, that it was all her fault. She blamed herself for the family's destruction. I had to set her straight. I acknowledged my own misdeeds. We sobbed together. After that talk, she seemed to relax a bit. On my wedding day, she looked radiant, and Jocelyn spontaneously made her a bridesmaid, with Roberto as a groomsman. The ceremony was beautiful. At the reception, I specifically asked the DJ to play the same song from her quincianera, Cinderella, by Stephen Curtis Chapman, and asked Luna for a dance. She clung to me, weeping softly. I hadn't felt that happy in ages. They ended up staying in my house while Jocelyn and I flew off to Hawaii for our honeymoon. When we returned, Luna was all smiles, hugging us at the door, telling me everything about how she'd looked after her baby brother. Roberto confided that he would soon be assigned to Camp Dwyer in Afghanistan, and asked if we could keep an eye on Luna. He even offered money for an apartment near us. I immediately agreed. Jocelyn suggested we just place a double-wide trailer on our property for them, letting them save up for their own house after his deployment. They flew back to New York a couple of days ago. It's been a whirlwind, but a joyful one. They're tying the knot in November, and Roberto ships out in December. He wired me a year's worth of rent money, but I'm leaning toward not using it for that, especially if we're building the double-wide. Marisol has been flooding my voicemail with hysterical messages, angered that Luna might relocate here permanently. Right now, my priority is my family and repairing my relationship with my daughter. Update 4, I've waited for Luna to get back from her honeymoon so I could show her this post. Our family therapist wants us to maintain transparency about everything, and I needed Luna's green light before sharing more details, since the story involves her as well. She read the entire post, cried a lot, and we agreed she wouldn't read any hateful comments. She told me it was okay to post an update. Then tragedy struck. My grandmother passed away, so I had to put everything on hold. Here's what's transpired. We successfully placed a double-wide on our land for Luna and Roberto. Folks often wonder why Jocelyn was so determined for me to mend things in the first place. In truth, she didn't want my unresolved bitterness to become a poison that seeped into our day-to-day life. She wanted our children to have a peaceful, emotionally stable father, and I'm so thankful for that push. Right after we set up the double-wide, Marisol began bombarding me with calls. The day Luna flew out of New York, Marisol called, crying and furious, accusing me of taking her daughter and grandson away. I reassured her that I only wanted a chance to bond with Luna again. Instantly, Marisol started bringing up reconciling our own relationship. I had to shut that down, saying there was no future for us. She cried, then hung up. Luna and Roberto quickly settled in. Luna and I started therapy together, and I learned about the many meds she's been on, as well as how severe her panic attacks had been. Listening to everything she endured broke my heart. Marisol had hurled emotional and mental abuse at her, my cousin had fed her lies, and my actions had also wounded her deeply. A couple of weeks later, Roberto got news that his deployment date had been moved sooner, so they decided to push up their wedding. Luna wanted me to walk her down the aisle, no big event, just a simple ceremony at my in-laws' ranch. She also told me she didn't need me to pay for anything except to be by her side. Some people have suggested paternity testing, since the judge's decision was based on textual evidence rather than a clinical DNA test, but there's no doubt. Luna has O positive blood, I may be negative, Marisol is B positive, my cousin is O positive. Yet it doesn't matter to me. She's still my daughter. Anyway, the wedding was intimate and lovely. My mother-in-law prepared a little area on the ranch for them. My ex-father-in-law and Roberto's mom showed up. Marisol was supposed to come but ended up admitted to a hospital for self-harm. We were worried about her mental health, but Luna tried not to dwell too hard on it, focusing instead on her big day. The day before the ceremony, my ex-father-in-law arrived with Roberto's mother. Both were very polite. He admitted he'd been upset with me for vanishing but understood my reasons. He only wished Marisol could let me go and stop dwelling in the past. The wedding itself was emotional. Jocelyn served as Luna's matron of honor, and I struggled not to cry as I escorted Luna in her dress. During the father-daughter dance, we used the same track from her quince and both cried again. After the newlyweds left for a short honeymoon, I was preparing this update, but then my grandmother passed away, which forced us to travel back to New York. My grandmother was laid to rest in Cypress Hill Cemetery. Standing there with my wife, my daughter, and my son-in-law, I was overwhelmed with grief, but I wasn't mad like I used to be. I didn't even acknowledge my cousin. He kept trailing after me, trying to provoke or apologize, maybe both, but I simply ignored him, which seemed to wound him more than if I'd punched him again. One day after the funeral, Luna and I decided to visit Marisol at Bellevue Hospital. She seemed delighted to see us but seemed mentally adrift. She would speak about preparing for Luna's quince, then abruptly snap back into the present, looking dazed. A therapist there pulled me aside, explaining that Marisol's mind was stuck in one of her happier moments, back when Luna was a younger teen, due to the trauma she experienced. Then the therapist dropped a bomb, speculating that my cousin might have forced himself on Marisol years ago. That shook me to my core. The therapist believed Marisol's brain tried to reframe the event as a single, misguided mistake to protect herself from the reality that she might have been violated. Stunned, I confided in Jocelyn, who was equally shocked. She insisted Luna should know. I hesitated, because Luna's mental health was so fragile. After discussing with Roberto, we gently sat Luna down and told her. She was devastated, but she wanted the truth. At the funeral's burial service, my cousin arrived drunk, made a scene, and I was moments away from unleashing all my anger on him, but Roberto held me back. My cousin shouted how he was always better than me, how he was responsible for me having a better life, since raising his daughter inadvertently made me a better man. I was boiling, but before I could attack, Luna punched him so hard he staggered. She pounced on him, screaming uncontrollably, tears streaming down her face. She got a few good hits in before Roberto pulled her away. Then, in a bizarre twist, Jocelyn slugged him too and knocked him out, injuring her finger in the process. After that fiasco, we came together as a family and decided that we'd transfer Marisol to a mental health facility in Idaho so she wouldn't be alone. She truly has no one else. We're still in therapy, and Luna is wrestling with this new knowledge that she might be the product of a forced encounter. Before all of this, I plan to legally adopt her again, since my name was taken off her birth certificate, but I'm not sure if this is the right moment, given all the emotional turbulence. That is where things stand. Life goes on, complicated and bittersweet. Jocelyn and I remain strong, grateful for every day. Luna grows closer to us, though her panic attacks still flare up unpredictably. She and Roberto are bracing for his deployment, and we're offering all the support possible. I owe every single person who offered advice or simply lent an ear a profound debt of gratitude. You helped me reclaim my daughter, and in a sense, my life. Thank you.